Modern Family star Sofia Vergara is facing an unusual twist in the battle over her frozen embryos. A right to live lawsuit has been filed against her by those two embryos. Vergara's former fiancé, Nick Loeb, dropped his original lawsuit against her this week, in which he tried to get custody of the embryos that the two of them had created when they were a couple. Loeb says he has nothing to do with this new lawsuit. Let's discuss this with CNN senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin and CNN legal analyst Laura Coates. Great to see both of you.
Good morning.
Jeffrey, how do two embryos file a lawsuit?
They don't. I mean, I think this lawsuit is going to be thrown out because I don't think there is any way that a court would find embryos to have standing. Under the law at the moment, embryos are property. They are not people. This is all tied up with abortion politics. And this is an attempt to try to elevate embryos into something they are not under the law. But at the moment, at least, this lawsuit is going to be thrown out.
Hey, Laura, Nick Loeb has told CNN that this is not his lawsuit. So how do these two embryos, how did this even happen? Who's acting on their behalf?
Well, the thing is, in Louisiana, it has the only state in the union that actually has some laws that give some rights to embryos, pre-implanted embryos. And so it's actually a trustee who's acting on behalf of these two embryos, saying that, listen, Sofia Vergara is denying them the right to have access to an inheritance in the form of a trust. And so there is an economic harm that they're going to face if they are not implanted and get to see life as we have defined it in the law. And so it's a strategic decision to go to Louisiana and hope that because of their very, very pro-embryo rights legislation, that they will have some leg to stand on. But ultimately, as Jeff says, I think this is not a case that will see much light, but for the fact that you've got competing interests in the viability argument when it comes to pro-life and pro-choice arguments.
We know actually a little bit more about these embryos. They are apparently both female embryos. They have names in this lawsuit, Emma and Isabella. They have requested that Nick Loeb, their biological father, get custody of them and let them live. He would very much like custody of them. He had been fighting for a couple of years to get custody of them, something that Sofia Vergara did not want. She did not want them to be born. He does want them to be born. So forget this nutty case for a moment. Who does, when embryos exist, who does have custody?
Well, this is one of the areas where the law is trying to catch up with technology. And frankly, the rules are in flux at the moment. But I mean, I think the lesson to people who may be listening is that when an embryo is created, it is important for the mother and father, the people who created the embryo, to agree in advance and in writing how the embryos are going to be handled, because once
if they break up,
if something happens, somebody dies, it's very important to designate how these are going to be handled, because if you don't designate it, it can wind up in the courts. And frankly, this is an area in terms of ownership of embryos that is very unsettled under the law.
Laura, there's another wrinkle to this case, and that is a couple of weeks ago, Sofia Vergara and the judge in this custody case wanted Nick Loeb to produce the names and contact information of two others, I believe, of his ex-girlfriends, who had had abortions. They were trying to prove that he wasn't always right to life and that this was some sort of publicity maneuver. But that is, I mean, what does that mean? That publicly to produce these names of anonymous women where they would have been sort of shamed in public or had to reveal to their now spouses or employers. I mean, that's a whole nother wrinkle in terms of right to privacy. Where's the law on that?
Well, absolutely. Someone does not have to be outed in terms of having received an abortion in the past, even if it's for a civil lawsuit. But what was happening in that case essentially was this. The judge was trying to figure out and grapple with, how do I decide the property interest? How do I decide the balance of interests here? And you've got a contract that doesn't say anything about what happens if they break up, only if they die. So the court in California said, listen, I'm going to do a balancing act here and figure out, is there any alternative reason or any reasonable way to actually have a biological child for this man. And if there's not, I'm going to have to figure that out if it's publicity or not. And so when you had Sofia Vergara's attorneys requesting that information, is with the intent of deposing them to figure out two things. One, whether in fact he always has had this right to life, to live feelings and standpoint, but also to figure out, is this somebody who has an alternative means of getting a biological child and has thwarted those attempts in the past, and how should that guide the court now? This is a very, very unsettled thing, and really, Allison, it comes down to an argument over whether or not an embryo, as Jeffrey says, is a property or it's a human that has vested interest, and I think the courts are still grappling with it.
Yeah.
These are just two people who can't stand each other anymore. I mean, that's
the bottom line.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
They're trying to use the courts to work out their very, very angry feelings.
Jeffrey Toobin, Laura Coates, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're